Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Steve the Missionary Bathrobe Chat Live. It is Monday, May 13th, and I am excited to talk to you guys. Please remember the chat is on the side. Go ahead and talk about whatever you want. I love it when the viewers steer the conversation because sometimes I get bored of my own voice. So this should be a lot of fun. I threw my phone away or behind me, so I'm not even going to pay attention to that. Today we are talking about a couple of things that Pope Francis has done recently. Um, One is it's more like what he's setting up to do, and there have been document leaks. So people are on the news, Catholic news, are excited. Hello, Sean. Welcome back to the show. And so one thing is Pope Francis trying to revamp the Curia, which is the entire set of um, positions, offices, congregations, as it were, in the Vatican that help him run things. So that's one, and number two is this document he put out, and it is called fun. Vos estis lux mundi, you are the light of the world, and that's his statement about abuse, sexual abuse, and the finally putting down on paper what you're supposed to do when that happens. So we're going to talk about both of those things: what's bad about it, what's good about it, and what um, uh, and what we can expect from the future. So this should be a lot of fun once the lighting gets better. We're going to start with what happened first. So what happened first was um, the at the beginning of the month we saw Pope Francis essentially what was a leak, and it was a document that was leaked to a Spanish newspaper about the offices and congregations in the church and how Pope Francis wants to reorganize them. So when you go to the Vatican, or if for people who work in the Vatican, there are various job titles and offices and people who are bosses of who, and there's a whole org chart in the Vatican, and these are usually put into clumps that are called either congregations, so like the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith is one, or they're a pontifical council, usually smaller, usually have less power. So that things like the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization, which is something that Pope Benedict invented back in his day. So popes can invent and shut down various offices just like a boss of any organization can. The best way that I think about the Curia is actually the diocesan offices at your own local Catholic diocese. So I used to work in the diocesan offices. We called it the chancery. That was the Latin word for it. Sometimes some places will call it the Catholic center, the pastoral center, and that it's kind of the same thing. Think of your curia as your chancery or pastoral center, and all the various councils and congregations as the different offices inside of the chancery. So I was part of the Office of Faith Formation and Evangelization, and that would have been our version of a pontifical council, if you will. Here, Pope Francis is condensing a bunch together. He's revamping the org chart, as it were, and so he's taking all these congregations and pontifical councils and he's lumping them together, and he's taking out the word congregation or pontifical council, and he's just using the word dicastery, which is fun, I guess, and kind of confusing. All it means is office in another language. But and thank you, Rebecca, for joining us. How you doing? All dicastery means is office in another language, and so you're noticing a lot of offices that are getting put together. So there are two new offices, and the biggest one, the one everyone is like freaking out about, is the super dicastery for evangelization. And he's creating the super dicastery by lumping together the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, and so that's the missions office of the Vatican, and the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization, the thing that Benedict invented when he was noticing how though what Europe and America are getting super secularized. And he's putting them together and calling them a super dicastery. And it's making people think that it's becoming more important than things like the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. And there's you and this is what happened a couple weeks ago. You saw a lot of people get very uptight and start asking questions like, is evangelization more important than good doctrine? So that's the first question we're going to talk about right now. Is evangelization more important than good doctrine? And the answer is that's a stupid question. The idea asking the question, is evangelization more important than doctrine, is essentially asking if you're going to put one over the other. If you had to choose only one, which one would you choose? If you wanted to start with one, um, what would you start with? Um, which should be in charge of the other? And I think the better question is, what should be the goal of the church? And the popes of the last century have been very adamant. Evangelization is the goal of the church, and you obviously have need a good doctrine in order to get there. What's up, Shaggy? But you our goal is not to, if your center, most important, most emphasized aspect of working as a church is good doctrine, then that makes you a staid and static organization. And while the church should never abandon its doctrine, and indeed it won't, we're not getting rid of the office of the doctrine of the faith. We are saying that good doctrine is the step you need, the foundation on which you evangelize and you care for the poor. This is what you do. And that, I think that's extremely important. Like, the goal is to evangelize. So why our goal is not merely to get good doctrine. Good doctrine is kind of square one, and if you spend all your time focusing on square one, you never actually like accomplish your goal. So I'm actually really happy that um, that the Pope is calling this a super dicastery for evangelization, and kind of tipping the scales and showing that the thing that matters to him is the evangelization, you know, standing on top of a foundation of good doctrine, not in tension with or in competition against good doctrine, because that's dumb, that bad doctrine. So with that, the kind of first thing that I'm very passionate about, going to questions. Sarah, first time on the live chat, very interested in the conversation about Pope Francis' new letter, writing a blog post about it now. Sarah, I'm guessing you're talking about um everything he said about abuse and how we're going to handle it, which I'm getting to. And Rebecca's feel like she's far behind, and don't worry, this wasn't very well reported on, partially because it hasn't officially happened yet. Excuse me. Mostly people are working off of like leaks and stuff, but then it gets published in things like Crux in America, so we assume that it's something that actually happened. Um, but they think that he's going to sign it later in the summer. And so here's the goal that keeps getting stated, and this is a very, very Pope Francis goal. The idea is, the Curia in Rome is this very heavy bureaucracy full of a lot of people shuffling a lot of paper, sometimes slowing things down, and sometimes that's a good thing. Um, this revamp is supposed to do two things. One, it's supposed to make it leaner, kind of leaner and meaner, and actually serve the needs that are coming to of the people that come to that bureaucracy. I need this done. Okay, here, now it's done. And two, the Curia as it is now, especially with the CDF being the main player, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith being the main player, um, was that it kind of stood as a gatekeeper for anyone who wanted a high and mighty career or advancement. People who wanted to play their chess pieces right, to have a lot of power in the church, or to get elected pope one day. That was, like Pope Benedict XVI used to be the head of the CDF, and then he became pope. Not, I'm not accusing him of being massively power hungry, but this is not uncommon in the Roman Curia, that these things that people can play their chess pieces right, so they can make moves like that. So Pope Francis is trying to end that model of Curia and trying to instead make it a smaller office that reacts to the needs of the churches under it, and the churches under it get to work fairly um, mostly get to work fairly autonomously on the things they need. And then they go to Rome and say, "Hi, I need this so that I can accomplish the thing I want." And hopefully Rome can oblige. It will hopefully make the curial offices less career or advancement based. And maybe that means that less, bishops will want jobs there, and will go to like actually serving the people, and maybe that there will be more places for lay men and lay women in the curia as these offices um, lose some of the a priest has to hold this job, a bishop has to hold this job status. So all of those are hopefully, maybe it might happen. So that's going to be fun to kind of like watch as it goes out. And this document is kind of it says in the document, uh, these are the rules for the next 25 years, and then we'll see if it actually works. So that should be really super interesting as it goes on. I've seen things on Crux on America about it, and the title of the thing is Predicate Evangelium. Predicate Evangelium. Preach the gospel. And it's about revamping the Roman Curia, and it hasn't been published yet, but people know about it. So on top of that, we're going to talk about one other thing, and that this made big news last week, and I really want to go over it. It is Francis's new document, issued motu proprio, so something that the Pope wrote kind of himself, um, by Francis, called "You Are the Light of the World," and it starts with um, the Bible quote, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." And then later, a quote from John, "Apart from me," Jesus says, "you can do nothing." And it's in response to the sex abuse crisis that's happening in America, but also in Ireland and parts of India and Chile and worldwide. The response to sexual abuse is really bad, and so he's trying to make church-wide, worldwide rules on how to deal with sexual abuse. So I really like it, and I'm going to go down why. And part of the reason one of the feelings you're going to feel when we talk about this is that why haven't these rules already been um, why haven't these rules already been put in place? And yeah, it's a little too late, but I'm glad it's finally on the books. So here we go. These norms apply to everybody. All right. These are the things that are being stated as official laws that are broken, that can be broken. Forcing someone by violence or threat or through abuse of authority to perform or submit to sexual acts. Performing sexual acts with a minor or vulnerable person. The production, exhibition, possession, or distribution, including by electronic means, of child pornography, as well as recruitment and inducement of a minor or a vulnerable person to participate in pornographic exhibitions. Um, Projects carried out by a bunch of people, cardinals, patriarchs, bishops, legates of the Roman Pontiff. Anytime one of those people commit actions that are intended to interfere or avoid with civil investigations or canonical investigations, whether administrative or penal, against cleric or religious, regarding all of this, and then defines things. So that's huge. Even in the first statement, he said this is a document that is putting in place how we are going to report report and investigate these crimes, stating them very explicitly and including things that probably weren't included before, things like through abuse of authority. That was not um, an understanding of consent put in old ideas, old iterations of canon law. So, use of authority, performing sexual acts with a minor or a vulnerable person, um, um, consisting in actions or omissions intended to interfere with or avoid civil investigations are all considered crimes under canon law and to be investigated and punished. Punishment is not actually um, taken care of in this document. Um, if I knew more about this, I would probably say it would like the severity of each crime was included in this document, but it didn't go much on punishment. So I'm really glad that. But at first, I'm really glad about this um, scope of application. What we are talking about, what crimes are being talked about. Some people talked about how this does not mention consensual sex between two clerics. This does not mention other um, forms of a priest breaking his vows, and therefore makes it a weak document. And they're right. We should definitely punish priests who break their vows, even consensually. Uh, but I think that, and I think that um, a uh, a culture of how do I put this? A culture of sexual licentiousness among the clergy, and trying to hide that can definitely spawn a culture of hiding abuse. But it in and of itself is not abuse, and this document is about abuse. And that some people disagree with me on that, but that's where I'm going, and that's kind of that's my stance on this one. And so it goes down to who has to report, and it's basically anybody, anybody who works in church hierarchy or is a cleric themselves, and and then um, saying and then specifically stating that there's protection of the person submitting the report, and then explicitly putting it down. See, that's the thing I like about this document. There are do and of an organization when something bad happens, but this puts it in explicit writing from the inside of the organization that this is what's going to happen. So things like Article 5, care for the person. And it states when someone claims that they have been abused, or there's an accusation saying so and so was abused by so and so, this person now has the right to be welcomed, listened to, and supported, including through provision of specific services like spiritual assistance, medical assistance, therapeutic and psychological assistance, and that their good name and privacy of this person involved is protected. So we're holding ourselves accountable to these things. There's a lot of rigmarole about it gets reported to your bishop, and then the bishop is required to tell the metropolitan, basically the nearest archbishop, and that metropolitan is required to tell this new dicastery. And so there's a lot of places that can be um, reported to the new. So we talked about dicasteries already, and there's a lot of different places that can be reported to. So this can include the Congregation of Oriental Churches, of bishops, of evangelization for people, and the Institute for Consecrated Life, or the clergy. So he's saying it used to be only for the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, because they were the ones with the most muscle, I think. But now Pope Francis is saying the most appropriate place out of all of these things that I just listed, those are the people you report to, and their job because they're more close to the ground. Whether if we're talking about a clergy member, a member of consecrated life, someone from the Oriental churches, or a bishop, they're the ones that will handle the reporting. They're the ones that will um, uh, see through that the investigation happens and finishes. They're the ones that will receive the report from the bishop or ordinary once the investigation is complete, and they're the ones that will um, carry out the conclusion of that investigation. Um, so and it spells out very direct rules of what that investigation is supposed to be. Article 13 is the coolest in terms of lay people, because it talks about involvement of qualified persons, saying that other people can be involved in the investigation if they are qualified. This is the one that does not explicitly, unfortunately, say call for or ask for um, lay involvement, but gives the window and the motivation to bring lay involvement. The motivation is justice. Hopefully, we have that motivation. And sometimes the best people qualified for that are people who have gotten psychology degrees because they are lay people. And so lay involvement of qualified persons is most welcome in Article 13. Investigation should be completed in 90 days, which is awesome, I think. Within 90 days, you should be done with your investigation. You can apply to one of those dicasteries for longer, but the goal is to finish the investigation in 90 days, a segment for how you can get the money. And then at the very, very end, unless it decides to provide a supplementary investigation, the competent dicastery proceeds in accordance with the law for the specific cases. So that's where the then it gets folded into the rest of canon law, how the church runs. And then at the very, very end, these norms apply without prejudice to the rights and obligations established in each place by state laws, particularly those concerning any reporting obligations to the competent civil authorities. So this is one of the articles that you have to remember, that Pope Francis is trying to write rules for literally every Catholic across the entire world. And so in America, this is a very important article. In America, any adult who in an official way is working with the Catholic Church. So that includes volunteers flipping pancakes at a pancake breakfast. That includes all of your youth ministers, anyone at an office, and definitely any clergy or religious or bishop has agreed to become a mandatory reporter of all um, abuse of minors. So with Article 19, the Pope is reminding you, you will not infringe upon your legal duty in your civil state to report, which is massive. But what if you live in a place like Saudi Arabia, the northern part of Nigeria, Indonesia, China, places with persecution, places where going to the police and saying, I know someone, or someone at my church got abused, and it's this priest, or where that could put you in danger of, one, that's not legally required, and two, that could put you in two, maybe that was through his abuse of his power and not through direct force, and maybe that has nothing to do with the rape laws in a country. And three, if it's a place that persecutes against Christians or doesn't like mass being done in specific places or times or without specific understanding from the government, that could put you in danger for a lot of ways, just because you're a Catholic. By saying, I know a priest who abused somebody, you are admitting you know who priests are. And so while the canonical repercussions still exist, and you're still required to, the Pope at the very end of this document is only giving the obligations placed on you by the laws of your civil state. One, because civil states won't help you beyond the laws that they've placed on themselves. And two, because he's working in Catholics in all situations. And I think that's worth noting when we talk about Pope Francis and when we talk about this document, how people were a little confused and mad that the document did not explicitly state that a person is required to go to the government and go to the police to report sexual abuse. And it happened for two reasons. One is it kind of did. Um, but kind of in a backward way. It said earlier in the document, uh, you are not allowed to infringe on a civil investigation or avoid a civil investigation. And two, you are bound by the laws of your country to report abuse. And so then it starts to come on the country, like especially in my old job, I was a mandatory reporter. But as it is, if a random person who is walking down the street catches somebody raping anybody of any age, they are not a mandatory reporter. They're just a bystander. They are not accessory to rape under American law, as far as I can tell. And that's not good. Um, that's really not good. So I don't work that's kind of a place that you're stuck. For Catholics, we know that non-report is what leads to um, further scandal. So it's almost like Catholics are better at reporting than almost anyone else um, nowadays. But it's still a weird place in this document. There is a hole in the document. If a random Catholic who is not part of any official church ministry and has never agreed to be a reporter discovers or witnesses sexual abuse of a minor or vulnerable person, they are not bound by canonical law or civil law to report it to anybody. They are a priest, a cleric, mandatory reporter is. Random Catholic is not. And I don't know how to fix that. We could just say it in canon law that they're and maybe I hope that this kind of encourages that sort of law to be written. Just like that other document I talked about, this is established as an experiment, but for 3 years. So in 3 years, the idea this will encourage us to note that we still have not fixed the problem of reporting in the Catholic Church, but we also want to make sure that in 3 years we have gotten good at um, finding and ending abuse. Uh, just like we have gotten so much better at finding and ending creepy people. All the Catholic organizations I've been a part of have become very good at saying this behavior of yours isn't abusive, but it is not allowed, and it's not allowed because abusive people like to do these things. So please stop. And it's amazing how a normal, healthy person will stop doing those things and find other ways to minister, and how the creepy people and the people you end up not trusting, um, they usually skip town. They usually just leave the ministry at that point. And that's one of the things I like about the current church, especially in America, is we're extremely good at weeding out people who are potentially abusive. So with that, I'm going to go to some of these chats. Shaggy, how much do you think the revamp is also in accordance with the corruption within the bishops and to curb that faster? I think a lot. I think the more you lower the influence of an office, the less a corrupt person wants to own it. I was reading an article by Thomas Rees, a long time, news contributor, and he was saying the Pope's idea isn't any good. What we should do is revamp the economic office of the bank and make it even more powerful to overlook all of the offices, to make sure that there's no economic corruption in any financial corruption in any of the other offices. And that shocked me as an idea. That's a dumb idea because the Vatican Economic Office, the Vatican Bank, is famously corrupt, and like growing it was not going to make it better. So Pope Francis's idea of maybe shrinking the influence of various offices um, would work um, to shrink corruption. Um, you gotta. That's the problem. You have to be a political mastermind in order to fix the Vatican. I'm not a political mastermind, and I don't think Pope Francis is. So, as much as I like his ideas of reform, that's no promise that they're good. So, Rebecca, what are your thoughts on lay oversight? I thought, based on an article that she read about the document, it was kind of weak on requiring outside oversight. It is weak on requiring outside oversight. It doesn't, straight up. It invites outside help, but does not establish outside oversight. I think that the American bishops might add that, and I would call for the American and Canadian bishops to add that to their charter of how they're going to run things. But I think that has to do, one, because these are steps that have never been taken before, and they're still trying to figure out what works. And two, he's talking to the whole world church, and not every bishop can create lay oversight committees, just as a pure fact of where people live and how poorly you're able to be organized in a undeveloped situation, or in a persecuted situation. Sarah asks, I'm interested to see how this changes the policies in the U.S. Have you read DiNardo's statement? I have not read DiNardo's statement. I too am interested how it changes the policy in the U.S. For me, I think Americans got a lot of what they wanted out of this document, and we got a lot of what we wanted worldwide. So I remember being extremely mad in like March or immediately after the World Bishops meeting, because the bishops had to hold off on their action on what they were going to do in America, so that Pope Francis could have this international meeting so that he could write this document. And for a while there, especially when the meeting was over and we were hearing some of the things the bishops were saying, it seemed like it wasn't worth it. It seemed like we were only getting slower instead of faster in fixing these problems and addressing these issues. But Pope Francis has put this out, and this is it a huge leap forward, a late leap forward, but a huge leap forward. So I'm really, really happy. Um, and then, oh, well, there you go. Rebecca just found out she's a mandatory reporter. um, so, and then we're making fun of Judas being the treasurer because treasurers are corrupt. That's one thing I've noticed is people say, "Did you know the Vatican Bank is corrupt?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, just by the two words, Vatican and bank, you should know it's a corrupt place, or a place like very susceptible to corruption." Sarah, DiNardo mentions that the scope of our policies will be expanded, particularly in terms of abuse of power. That's good. We might get some very specific definitions of abuse of power. So this, if people were wondering what sex between seminarians and priests and seminarians and all of that other stuff that isn't like the direct heinousness of sexual abuse of minors, and how that's going to be litigated canonically. I like using big words. How you're going to get in trouble church wise is 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 going to be spelled out by our bishops here. For those of you who don't know, Bishop DiNardo is the Archbishop of Houston, and then he was elected as the head of the council, the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. So he's the one kind of in charge of all the national Catholic rulemaking in America. So those are the two big things that Pope Francis is doing this summer. He is reforming the Curia, essentially restructuring his chancery, which basically every diocese has done in the last 20 years. And um, and he's created this new document on how we're going to report minors. Sarah asks a really important question: what do you make of everything being reported to the bishops? There is actually a really good section in the document that talks about that. Not everything is reported to the bishops. Everything is reported to a bishop, and then, but if the bishop is getting accused, say, then it goes to the nearest archbishop. And if the archbishop is getting accused, then it goes to the papal nuncio, or the guy that holds that role. Essentially, the nearest um, bishop, pope's embassy to that country. And there's always an option to just go straight to whatever dicastery is closest, to go straight to Rome. So and Rebecca's saying, why not just straight to the cops? Which we've already talked about. You can just go straight to the cops. Going straight to the cops will get someone arrested, but it won't get somebody defrocked. It won't get somebody excommunicated. It won't get somebody separated from his office as a cardinal or bishop. But it will get him arrested, which is a good thing. So there is a lot of, if this person's getting accused, report to this person and keep going up. The idea is to give the local bishop as much of a say as possible to do the work, so that it's not all coalesced into one diocesan office or one Vatican office, which is what happened in the last 10 years, and which is why things took forever to get done, because there was only one office doing it. And instead of having one office doing it, you publish the rules for everyone, and then give the localist bishop the job of addressing the problem. That was the idea in this document. But as always, if you know that someone's being raped, or even if you suspect someone of being inappropriate, tell the cops. A friend of mine had to go through this situation earlier this year. He's like, I'm suspecting someone at my parish of being inappropriate with children, but I have no evidence of actual sexual misconduct in a legal sense. Nothing that would ever hold up in court or even lead to an arrest. And I said, go tell the cops, and tell the cops exactly that. Say, I have a suspicion about so-and-so. This is why I understand that it's not enough to hold up in court or lead to an arrest, but I do want it stated. And I do want very useless, but if something bad does happen, the cops won't be surprised. They'll know what they're dealing with. It's always part of the tragedy of a lot of these things is how surprised everyone is how they got away for so long because so few people were had their eyes out, paying attention. And so don't add to that if you are suspecting someone. If you have a real reason to suspect but no proof, tell the cops and tell that person's boss. I have no clue what they will be obliged or even allowed to do, but don't let the room be silent just because there's no court-worthy proof yet. And that's why that's what I'm going to end the pod today. So thank you very much for coming out. This week is going to be excellent. I'm going to be talking about a Trump rally that I went to last week, not last week, like 2 years ago, an anti-Trump rally that I went to a couple years ago, and what we could learn as Christians and what we can learn as pro-lifers from the hella progressive people I was hanging out with that one night in Oakland. So make sure to follow Steve the Missionary, and make sure to go to my Patreon, patreon.com/SteveTM. I love you all. The pod is ended. Go in peace.